Hey, what's going on, everybody? We're back with our BKFC Reddit Ask Me Anything. We're joined by Sean, Wheelock, and Camron. How you doing?
Thank you for having me on.
How are you doing?
Cameron, how are you? What's going on, guys?
Doing great. How are you doing, Sean?
Very good. It's even colder in Kansas City, my friend. It was -4 overnight.
Ooh, we're in single digits in Michigan with a wind chill around -15. So, like, yeah, I'm not here to get in a competition right off the get-go with you here. But yeah, no, it's cold out there.
I would happily lose that competition. Anything below 50, it hurts me to the core.
Yeah.
It was -22 when I got up and -45 with the wind chill. So it was a little brisk up here in northern Wisconsin.
Brutal.
You just put on a huge event, Sean, with your referee and judges course. I would love to talk about that. That was my alter. Yeah. I know Knucklemania is coming up. I don't care about that. I want to talk to you about this referee course. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then I'll start asking you.
So my entry into combat sports when I was 22, I started refereeing pro boxing. And I was very serious on it. And I started getting TV work, and my broadcasting career got going. And I just kind of phased out refereeing. But I was on the Kansas Athletic Commission for 8 years, appointed by 2 different governors, a Republican and then a Democrat. I stayed totally apolitical. I was just there to try to help fighters and fighter safety and fighter integrity and fairness and really try to do what I could for combat sports in Kansas. But I've always been interested on the regulatory side. In 2015, I was appointed national chairman of the ABC's MMA Rules and Regs Committee. I was one of the founding members of the ABC's Bare Knuckle Rules and Regs Committee in 2023. So that's always been a big part of what I want to do and what I do in BKFC. Behind the scenes, people, if they know me as the commentator, play-by-play for BKFC, working along with Chris Lytle. But behind the scenes for David Feldman, actually since 2016, 2 years before we launched, I've been working on the regulatory front, talking to athletic commissions, trying to bring in bare knuckle safely, legally, fully regulated. And that was really for the first 2 years I worked with David Feldman. Other than introducing him to a few fighters in a few gyms, that was the focus. So with all of that said, about 18 months ago, my buddy Scott Bowler, who's the head of the Utah Commission, asked me if he would put together a Zoom course, just do 2 hours, just to get his people up to speed. It was our first BKFC. Happy to do it. Bowler's a great guy. I always love putting forth that type of thing. So I threw together some videos, had a Zoom course. A few California people were on. Word got out that was a pretty good course. California asked me to do it. Mike Mazzulli, that head of the Mohegan tribe and the ABC president, Association of Boxing Commissions and Combative Sports, was on, asked me to do it. It's just kind of grown from there. So I've been doing these in person. I've done them over Zoom. I did it for the Japanese Mixed Martial Arts Officials Committee. I've done a number of these, maybe 12 or 14. I get squirrely, guys, when I'm off the road. And Cameron, you met my family, my wife, my 2 daughters putting this together. You didn't meet my mom, but I live 10 minutes from my mom where I grew up. My family is everything to me. With all that said, I get squirrely if I'm off the road for more than a couple of weeks. So we had 4 weeks off between BKFC, December 21st at Seminole Hard Rock in Florida, and what we just had at Pechanga in California last weekend. So I thought, all right, well, I'll try to maximize my time. Let me see if I can do a bare knuckle refs and judges course. I know my Kansas people will come. Maybe we'll get a few in Missouri, maybe some Oklahoma, a couple Iowa, a couple in Nebraska. If we can do 40 people, man, that would be great. I'll only lose about $1,000 or $1,500. If we get more than that, maybe I break even. We had 144 people from 35 states plus Canada. It exceeded all of my expectations. As you guys know, I'm an optimist by nature, and it exceeded my most optimistic expectations and projections. And I want to make it clear, it's not me, it's the sport of bare knuckle. People came because of bare knuckle. They want to be involved. Boxing people, MMA people, people out of collegiate wrestling, out of sambo, out of judo, out of jiu-jitsu, USA boxing. We had some of the highest level boxing people in the world out of the WBC, people who've refed and judged the UFC. It was a group unlike any I've ever seen before, coming all together in one conference room over 2 days in Kansas City.
I knew it was going to be huge when I saw fighters were actually
Yeah.
like signing up to go to fighters wanted to get better and know, know a little more about what it comes to in the ring and what the judges are looking for and what the referees, kind of like the rules and stuff. So I knew it was going to be like a phenomenal event when I saw like the amount of support you had from people in the business.
Yeah, I was blown away on that. And, I mean, Cameron, you were there, and you saw the fighters. I was joking we were going to put together maybe a 16-fighter mixed gender open weight tournament. Chris Lieben, who's now refereeing, but Chris Lieben, a UFC legend, and finished his career happily in BKFC. My buddy Lyle came in from Indianapolis. He was one of my demo fighters. But for active fighters, I'm going to be forgetting people, but Zeb Vincent, Jessica Borga, Jessica Link, Todd Duffy, Daniel Gallimore, J.W. Kaiser, Paul Bointello. It blew me, and I'm forgetting people, forgive me, but the amount of fighters, and I thought I loved hearing from fighters. I thought it was so cool that they wanted to learn a new part of the game. Every fighter, and I asked them personally, I asked, will you ever look at a fight the same way again? And they said, no, we now really understand what the judges are looking for, what the refs are doing in the clinch, the whole knockdown procedure, and fully understanding. To me, I think I always love giving NFL analogies because I'm a huge NFL fan, but imagine if you played in the NFL and you weren't sure the value of, say, a safety, a touchdown, an extra point, a 2-point conversion, and a field goal. So maybe in your mind, if Brandon Aubrey kicks a 64-yard field goal, you go, oh, my God, that's spectacular. Or for the Eagles, Saquon Barkley has a 1-yard run. Maybe in your mind, you're like, wow, that Brandon Aubrey for the Cowboys, that 64-yard field goal was way more spectacular than this little routine 1-yard run, but it's obviously 6-3 in point value. And I think a lot of fighters aren't really sure what judges are looking for. I guarantee you the fighters who took my course now know what the judges are looking for. And you know what? No fault of the fighters. They don't know what the judges are looking for because that's not part of your curriculum when you train to be a professional fighter. There's not a gym in the world, whether it's MMA, boxing, Muay Thai, Letway, certainly bare knuckle, that says this is the criteria, so this is what the judges are looking for.
Cameron, you, as far as I know, aren't a fighter or anything. You are one of the mods on the Reddit. What made you decide I want to go take this class and like learn all the behind the, all the techniques and stuff of the reffing and judging?
Yeah, so like background for me, like even speaking transparently, I've not even been to a live combat sporting event. I've never been to a wrestling meet. I haven't seen a boxing match, nothing. Everything I've ever interacted with was, through a screen, watching it kind of as a normal consumer does. And it boiled down to an opportunity of either saving up and going to my first BKFC event or kind of doing something different and going to this. I've done little league coaching and that's as much of my experience, but I have a tremendous amount of respect just for the sport. And I kind of wanted to see just the opportunity that existed. I'm a lifelong learner. I believe that you should always try to learn something new, engage with something that's different. And I'm like, well, this most certainly is different. And I was very fascinated by the ruling, reffing, judging, scoring, the things you look for, the things you don't pay attention to. I think were really fascinating. And I came into just wanting to learn. That's really kind of where I wanted to be with all of this. Something very different, but something I'm very equally was embracing of. I think I even messaged Sean this. I walked in with the only expectation of really just learning. That was the thing I wanted to take away with it, is just being in the space, being able to hear others talk about it in a very passionate, concise, constructive way. And I walked away from it thinking to myself, realistically, man, I think I can find some place for myself in this, whether it is judging, whether it is as inspector, timekeeper. I think it really just helped me walk into a world that I had never been in before. I really wanted to step in to learn, and I walked away with a profound appreciation for everything else that goes on to put on these truly amazing events and truly amazing fights, and the opportunity it gives for individuals. It's just insane.
Yeah, and Cameron, I'll say I love the fact that you were there, and I was really clear in my marketing of this that this is for everybody. So you've never refereed or judged, man, I hope that you do. I really hope that you do. And I told people such as yourself, they said, well, I've never done this. Well, everybody had to start at one point. Nick Behrens, I found him in Kansas in 2011 when I was on the athletic commission. He was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who took his first course. And now Nick is one of the top referees in BKFC, and he'll be a judge on Knuckle Mania, and you see him refereeing in the UFC. You know, Jack Reese, the recently retired boxing referee, who I think is the best boxing referee in the world over the last 20 years, Jack Reese had to start somewhere. Everybody has to start somewhere. Sometimes I know I was on the outside at one point too. Athletic commissions look like secret societies. And really through the 80s and the 90s, they were kind of secret societies. It was like, well, how do you get in? Oh, you have to know someone who knows something. Maybe it's political, or maybe it's kind of that proverbial good old boys network getting in. The sad part about it, and this isn't every state commission, but this was a lot of the people there weren't even fight fans, let alone fighters. So the fact that, like, Camron, you're there because you love combat sports. Jessica Link is there as a fighter. Chris Lieben is there as a retired fighter. Someone like Jack Reese is there saying, I've reached the pinnacle in boxing, but now I'm really interested and I want to start working bare knuckle. That Nick Behrens, with all of his knowledge and experience, I think he ranks number 3 most bare knuckle bouts refereed of anybody on the planet. And he still took the course. And that's what I love, bringing everybody together. Camron, you heard me at the beginning of the course. I talked about this as a sport for everybody. It's the inclusivity, and I'm really big on that. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, female, male. You could be 18, you could be 218. It doesn't matter where you live, your experience. As long as you love combat sports, man, it's the right place for you. And, you know, MMA is that way a little bit. Boxing is tough. At the commission level, it can be easier. The highest levels, just the structure of WBC, WBA, there are a lot of things that you have to do. But bare knuckle, because we are such a young sport, you know, I've got the UFC 1 poster behind me. MMA is a young sport, man. You know, you think November 12th, 1993. That's not that long ago. But then right next to it is the BKFC poster. That's June 2nd, 2018. That's a really, really young sport. And I think with young sports, create opportunities. Things aren't so locked in that everybody can come in. And Camron, I really hope that if it's something you want to do, you look at, hey, I want to be a ref or a judge or an inspector or a timekeeper. And if you want to stay as a fan, that's cool. But I think somebody like yourself is exactly what combat sports needs.
See, I really appreciate that you talked about the inclusivity portion to it, because that was something that I think that I really took away from as well, is that I felt very much like an outsider even further removed, because I walked in not knowing anybody, not even recognizing any names by and large, and just kind of coming into this while saying, well, my pocket of understanding is bare knuckle fighting.
Right.
You know, I've been a fan for the last 3 or 4 years, but most of my knowledge is only that. And it wound up being very inclusive, and just being able to be there and kind of being looked at as like an equal participant in the process, right? And just as much being able to put a voice out there, you know, voice the things that I'm seeing, but also having that being taken at least underneath some consideration, whether or not it's right or wrong, at least was taken under consideration. And you're right, it was a very, you know, I would agree with this. This is just as much. This training course is just as much for like an average Joe or below average Cam, if you wish to say, as it was for anyone who has true experience. You know, I think really the breadth of individuals that were there contributed to a lot of the success in terms of the discussion and the flow of the content there. I think really clicked as very interesting. Mark Colloy, during the judges portion, was bringing up some really great points and questions throughout that I was like, that's great, because you hear that experience, you know, those years of experience brought over and being contributing to forwarding this conversation, and as we're all here to learn. You know, moments like that were incredible. And I also really want to highlight this specifically. Jack Reese's mechanical breakdown during the reffing portion was something that truly got me inspired. Just watching that and seeing the mechanical breakdown, the implementation of those, because you pulled up the document of pretty much like, you know, this is the process of how we walk through it, but actually walking through it with someone who had that kind of authority of mind, you know, everything that they did was just, I looked at it like, wow, that's something that truly exemplary. I was genuinely taken aback by it. That was probably amongst the biggest things I took away from it, was that mechanical breakdown session. And also the one that Nick Behrens did during the judging course as well. Actually seeing the application of everything we're talking about, even in those micro situations, was cemented so much for me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And, I'll address Mark Kalloy first. So, Mark, some people watching this may know, one of the best boxing referees in the world. He was the referee for Tyson Paul. And immediately after that show, when I was off air with Netflix, Mark and I were talking ringside. I told him he did a great job. I've known Mark for a long time from all the boxing I've commentated in my past. And Mark said, I think I want to take your course. And I'd only announced the course maybe 5 or 6 days before. I was surprised he'd even heard about it. So you think about it, here is a guy who just refereed Tyson Paul. He is in that elite of the elite of boxing, but he's humble enough to say, to do bare knuckle at the highest level, I need to take this course. And that blew me away. So with Jack Reese, and Jack said that he's now retired. I'm not saying anything that I shouldn't. Jack has made it public. He's retired from reffing. He's not retired from judging. Jack told me he wants to start judging bare knuckle, and he felt that he needed to do that to really understand that level of humbleness and humility. And I had asked Jack we had a social gathering, of course, on the Saturday night, which I'm very, very big on because I think people have to come. That's why I was happy to buy everybody's free drinks. It's not about me being greedy and squeezing out the last dollar. I wanted to pay for drinks. I wanted people to have fun, and I accomplished that because you had everybody coming together. A lot of business was done there. People talking to commissions, meeting people, networking, and that's what things like that are all about. In addition to the learning. But I said to Jack, I'm going to be going through the mechanical breakdown, which I learned from you taking your course. So I don't know that feels right to me. Would you be happy if I bring you up to do it? And he said, yeah, if you want to bring me up, I don't want to step on your toes. I said, absolutely not. I said, I'm asking Jack if you wouldn't mind. So Jack came up, as you were just saying, Cameron, and talked about that. And there are things that Jack Reese, he says he didn't invent, but I know he did, but Jack would say that he popularized them. 2 significant things that you never really saw in boxing before. One is the indication knockdown. You never saw that before Jack Reese. Now everybody does it. The other thing is walk forward, now walk to the side on a big assessment. Look at boxing up through the early 1990s. You never saw that. Jack Reese was the one. If he didn't invent it, which I think he did, he popularized it. And as Jack talked about, and there are a lot of police officers who take referees and judges courses and are in that. So the police officers in the room, of which there were many, were nodding their head. When there's a DUI test and they ask the person who they suspect being intoxicated to walk forward, it's reflexive, it's evolutionary. When you learn how to walk, I'm a father of 2 girls, they walk forward. But now you have to have some dexterity. Can you walk to the side? And that's why that was implemented. And I thought, how great that Jack Reese would come up in my course when he's taking my course and walk through that. A lot of people commented to me about it was cool to have Jack, and I was blown away as well. I've taken Jack's course before. I made the joke at one point, but it's true. Basically, everything I teach, I ripped off Jack Reese, John McCarthy, and Mills Lane because those are the best. I've taken a lot of boxing and refs, judges, and refs courses, and it's the same thing I do as a commentator. I rip off Pat Summerall constantly. I take what I think works the best, and I try to incorporate it into my own style.
I don't want to be controversial with this, but this past weekend there was a fighter that got sick in the ring.
Yeah.
Is it a universal thing if someone gets sick in the ring that they stop the fight, or is it up to the referee and the doctor's discretion?
So that's the Caleb Avila and Tyler Sijon fight. So this came about actually when I was chairing MMA rules and regs, and this goes back to 2016 or 2017. So I'll be as gentle as I can. If a fighter defecates in the ring, which we saw poor Justine Kish that happened to in the UFC, and I felt terrible for her against Felice Herrig, that's a medical hazard. So when we were doing that committee, our doctor on that committee is a doctor named Mark Watson, who's an emergency room physician, one of the ringside cage side physicians for the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He said to me, if somebody urinates on me, I'm not going to get sick. If somebody vomits on me, I might get sick. If somebody defecates on me, I'm definitely getting sick in the ER. So you look at it that way. And apparently, and I didn't know this, that in grappling situations in MMA, it's not that uncommon for a little bit of urine to come out. I know we're going on a weird path here, but what you're looking for in vomit, it's two things. It's a potential biohazard, but it's also maybe a sign that somebody could be concussed. And it's a lot of things. Sure. So if there's defecation, that's fight over because that's a clear biohazard. Urine, unless it's like pools and pools of urine, which I've never seen, thankfully, just kind of live with that. It's really sweat, blood. There's a lot of bodily fluids that are being excreted in professional combat sports. The vomit is, I've had this, actually was commentating maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It's on YouTube for Fighting Alliance Championship, an MMA show that I commentate for in Kansas City. And the kid took a spinning back kick and just puked out. Fight's over immediately there. We had Jordan Christensen in Montana, and he vomited between rounds. This was 2022 in Montana, but it went all over the canvas. The Caleb Avila thing, and I've had a couple of calls on this today, actually. That's the fine line. And, you almost get into like medical semantics. Was he spitting? Was he vomiting? Is he spitting up water? What if I took water and just spat out the water? So in those situations, what the doctor's looking for, what the referee's looking for is, I'll be as delicate as I can, kind of the Campbell's chunky soup that comes out. Because if you're totally vomiting everything in your stomach, that could be the sign of a concussion. The fact that maybe you just kind of spat out some water that you took in, that might be a sign of exhaustion. So that's a really fine line. I know there was controversy there. The fight continued, and Caleb Avila wound up winning. I'm sure Tyler Sijon, actually talked to him afterwards. They're both great people. I talked to both fighters. Tyler didn't mention anything to me about it. I believe it was either his manager or his trainer who's upset about it, but that's that very fine line. I think there are two issues. One, it didn't happen during the flow of the fight, like that spinning back kick I had in FAC. And secondly, it's not going all over the canvas. So it's a very, very fine line there.
Do you have anything, Cameron?
No, I was going to say, no, I kind of, right, it happened so fast in the moment. And almost, catching it on camera was there for about 10, 15 seconds and then cut away. It could have been equally believable that maybe he did take a swig,
right,
clear his mouth, exhaustion, get through it. I think that probably the supplementing fact is his body language wasn't indicating anything other than maybe exhaustion. Him going through already 2 rounds of the fight, nothing outright that said maybe he really is concussed. Because I think one of the prior fights, the last Hollywood card, or if I'm remembering correctly, but essentially one of the fighters, you could tell that it wasn't just exhaustion because he had vomited in his bucket, but it was the additional signs. It was almost as if you could see in his eyes or the way that he was trying to balance his head, he was gone at that point. So you're right. I agree. I think it definitely was one of those on the line moments for sure. But hey, that's also why it's maybe that's something that gets incorporated down the line, right? As part of your training courses, right? Every time we go through a new fight, we learn something different. We're able to discuss something new that we haven't approached before, right? As you talk about as well, bare knuckle fighting is a very young sport. We have a lot of examples and a lot of situations that, unfortunately for us, we have to go through them to learn about them, to figure out what the precedence really is going forward, to find out how do we adjust regulatory framework to account for a situation that we didn't think could have happened, and it did. So, I agree with you. I think it's one of those on-the-line moments that will probably be just carried forward with, discussed going forward to see really where is that line? Where can we make concrete decisions one way or another?
Yeah, that's well said. Hey, Camron, if I can ask you, what was in terms of judging? So having never worked as a judge or taken a course before, what was the biggest surprise to you, or was there a biggest surprise? Was there a misconception that you think maybe that you held that was put to rest on taking my course?
Yeah, so I would have to say that I think probably the two things that I carry forward with me the most is the concept of effective striking. Because I think because that's obviously number one with the scoring criteria is effective striking. And this is actually a point that I wound up talking with Mark Loy about later on the judging that day after the social is looking at the Franco Soto fight, you look at those last couple of rounds where Soto's kind of throwing those almost like a shovel uppercut hook into the body, right? They weren't necessarily coming with the same velocity. I called them howitzers, Franco's throwing. but they were effectively landing, right? They didn't have the same velocity or cadence that he was hitting with the first 3 rounds, but they were effectively landing. And I think that was the biggest takeaway, was from a scoring perspective, is looking at what is effective and how do you really interpret that over the duration of a fight. Also looking at the context of the fight, is a strike that may not have been effective round 1 eventually becomes effective by round 4, round 5. And then the second piece that I thought that I really kind of took away from was what counts as a viable striking zone. What counts as an effective strike when it lands. In my eyes, I looked at it as head body, but I really appreciate it because you're talking about, no, it's forearms, it's shoulders. It's really everything that faces in that 180-degree direction, which made me look at certain components, certain sequences differently, especially from a judging perspective, right? Because that's something I think that maybe you deviate from with looking at boxing, right? It's chest, sternum, head. Arms aren't as significant, but with BKFC, no, or bare knuckle fighting,
Right.
no, that matters, and that makes sense to me. It sounds so silly, but it makes so much more sense. And when you start opening up the idea of your effective striking area that way, you look at things a little more differently. Like I think there, for example, Perdomo with Bercier, right? Not to pick on Bercier at all, but for one of the things he was really doing is that Perdomo was trying to punch through the guard, right? Bercier is really trying to keep himself covered up, and Perdomo is just trying to really punch through it. In my eyes, I'm looking like, well, he's punching into the guard. It doesn't seem like it would count, but realistically, no, that damage is still passing through. That is still very much an effective strike, even if, like, upon looking at it, well, it's a block strike, it shouldn't count. No, it does. I think those are probably the 2 biggest things I walked away with. And I'm looking at fights. I've rewatched fights. As soon as I got back, the first thing I did was immediately pull up video and start scoring. And taking those kind of key points and really trying to interpret them and make, help that aid with how I judge, how I'm looking at things.
That's awesome. Yeah,
I'll be honest with you.
We got to get you in the judge, brother. I'm telling you. That's awesome. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, no, I think I picked up quite a few different lenses with which I'm now looking at fights now. Like I really appreciate as well. I think the inclusion of the Rankin-Melhorn fight is a really great example of between like judging as much of an art as it is a science. I'm somebody who saw that fight. That was probably my 3rd or 4th time watching that fight. Each time I had a different lens looking at it. It gave me a greater appreciation just as much for the training you put forward to get me to that point, but also how you can equally understand how one fan looks at that fight, calls it another way, how a judge with an understanding of the scoring pattern looks at a different way versus a ref who's in there who's also having to contemplate everything else. Like, it's a very great example that I appreciate the fact that you included that one amongst your other 2 great BKFC Marbella fights over there. Yeah.
Sean, this was very successful. What are your plans going forward for your judges and referee course?
So I think something like this is tough. I was limited to space. Had I known how many people wanted to do this, I would have booked a bigger room. We had 144 over the 2 days. I think if I kept my foot on the gas, continued to push, and we still had a long waiting list. We even had weather cancellations up till the day before, and I was able to plug people in. I think knowing what I know now, I think I could have gotten somewhere around 200 people. I also know that if I do this again in 3 months, Camron, as nice as you are and as kind as you're being with your words, it's a lot to ask people to come back in a few months. I'm realistic to that. What I would like to do is maybe make this an annual thing. The ABC has their national meetings, their convention, usually the last weekend of July or the first weekend of August. So I'd like to make this a regular thing in January, which is typically, whether I've worked for Pride or Bellator or BKFC, typically that's kind of a quiet period, is that early January window. You saw the UFC was off. They actually had a show on the 11th, but they were off the weekend before. So that's typically a quiet time. If this can become an annual thing, I would love to take this internationally. I have a possible promotional partner. It's not possible at all. He's definitely going to be my promotional partner on this, but a possible opportunity to do this in Canada. We're looking at Toronto. We're really just looking at venues and dates right now. And then I would love to take this abroad. I've heard from people in England, in Brazil, in Mexico. I would love to do this. Logistically for me, because this training was about 10 minutes from my house, and I had an amazing workforce, which is my wife and my 2 daughters. I understand if I go to England or if I go to Brazil or if I go to Bulgaria, I don't have that. We had gift bags in the back of my truck, and my wife's SUV and my 19-year-old daughter's SUV were filled with gift bags. So there are logistical things I can't do in other cities without having a promotional partner. But I would love to take this abroad. A lot of people have asked me about like, oh, you want to do this on Zoom or Google Meets? That's where this started. I think people get 20% of the experience. One, there's something about everybody being in the room, just like Cameron, the fact that you got to talk to Mark Colloy. And then secondly, I've just found that the more people that are on, you struggle with the technology. Somebody's video is freezing, someone's is lagging, and it just doesn't quite work. So I want people together in the same room, but I'm targeting right now with my definite promotional partner in Toronto, I hope, April, May time. I'm still waiting on our BKFC fixed schedule because obviously I have to do it on the weekend when we're dark on BKFC. And then we'll look and see. My wife is English. I would love to do this in England. I just want to keep teaching this, but I really hope that we can make this an annual thing in Kansas City, right around the first or second, third week of January every single year.
It's funny because on the Reddit, we've had Canada people, we've had England people go, when's he going to come here? So I think it's definitely there. And as you see, like, I feel like I get a new BKFC from a different country. Brazil followed me the other day. Bulgaria, like Spain, all these places are opening up. And I feel like this is going to be great for them to learn too.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing, honestly, is if somebody wants to do the legwork, which is there's a little bit of work involved in this, to put this on. And again, I was fortunate. I had 4 weeks off. I had my family working with me, and I found the venue 10 minutes from my house. But you have to book a quality conference room. You have to work with hotels so you can get a discounted hotel rate for everybody coming in. I'm a big believer in a social component. So I have a story to tell on that in a moment. But I wanted to find it. I had to find a bar that was willing to do a deal with me to get 300 drink tickets. I wanted to have gift bags. So there's a logistical component. If somebody just called me up in England and they said, we want to fly you over and we're going to do this, perfect, I'm in. But I want to make sure that it's done right. You have to have great audio. You have to have a great screen. You have to have a really conducive environment. And I think you have to have the social aspect. Here's my social aspect story. So there was, and I won't name names because I don't want to make anybody feel bad. It's not how I roll, but I'll tell the story. So Camron was there. So basically, the hotel that we were in sold out that room block. There was a second. Which hotel were you at, Camron? Were you at the Hyatt or were you at the Spring Hill?
I was at the Spring Hill.
So the Spring Hill was about a third of a mile away. That was my second hotel. Got a room block there, same rate for everybody, so everyone could get the discounted room rate. Sold that block out to. Kind of triangulated was where we did the social gathering. About a block from there, so this is all within like a quarter-mile radius. Within a block, I looked at a first place, sports bar, go in, meet the GM. Hey, this is what I'll spend. I'll give you the money right now. I'll give you cash right now, 300 drink tickets. She's like, yeah, I could feel the trepidation. And I was with my 13-year-old daughter, so I hardly looked threatening. But as soon as I said fighting and bare knuckle, I could feel the trepidation. She said, let me speak to my owner. She called me back a couple of days later. She's like, yeah, I spoke to my owner. We're going to pass. I said, you're not taking my money? And she said, yeah, the owner's just not comfortable. I said, because we're fighting? And she said, I can't speak for him. We're just not comfortable. I was like, who do you think this crowd is that's coming in? Like, do you think I'm bringing in savages and they're just going to start beating each other up and beating your patrons? I said, yeah, they're going to be professional fighters there, but they're going to be the chillest people in the room. I said, we're going to have police. We're going to have paramedics. We're going to have attorneys. We're going to have military. We're going to have teachers. We just don't want your money. But then thankfully I found the place that did want my money. They could not have been cooler. But that was a reminder that, all of this is normalized to us because we're all combat sports hardcores. But as soon as you say fighting or fighter or bare knuckle, there's a certain element of society still that thinks that you're bringing in a bunch of savages. And I guess we were going to burn the place to the ground.
Go ahead, Cameron.
I was just saying, it was the total opposite of the whole evening. Like, honestly, I think the venue change actually worked out because it was a nicer open space, lots of seating. People are able to talk. It sounds silly because I actually want to go into that bar later in the night. I couldn't hear anything for myself. So I think it actually wound up, sweet serendipity right there. That was good fortune that it worked out the way it did.
Yeah, and the owner of that place, I walked in, was like, absolutely, brother, let's do it. And I could, as soon as I walked in, I could tell this is the guy who's gonna get it, and he got it. But no, it was serendipity indeed. And if we do this every year, you know where we'll be doing this, and you know who will be receiving my money.
Very true.
Recently on the Reddit, there were some people. I was trying to say, I feel like BKFC is a family affair. Like I see kids at the things, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, everybody. And a lot of people were telling me, "Oh, I don't feel like it's very kid friendly." And I said, the fighters are the nicest people ever. It's not like they're being terrible. They're coming out and they're saying hi, and Dave walks around and shakes hands and stuff. I was like, to me, BKFC is absolutely family, and it's an all inclusive.
I agree. Yeah, my 13-year-old and 19-year-old, who you met, Ellie and Hadley, they're coming out to Knucklemania. Hadley is a massive Bryce Hall fan. He's not on the card any longer against Kimbo Slice Jr., Kevin Ferguson Jr. He's still coming. I talked to his manager, my buddy Brad Baskin, last night. They're getting her a shirt. And I hope Beck Rawlings doesn't think this will change my relationship with her in any way, because I love Beck and I love Taylor Starling. But Ellie, my older daughter, has an online friendship with Taylor Starling, and so she wanted to support her. So I've been taking my kids to fights. First time I took Ellie to a fight at MMA, she was 7 years old. And I think the first time I took Hadley to a fight, she was 4 years old. I've never seen the stigma. But it's kind of like my bar story of them not wanting us. I understand certain people look at it and they think, God, this is just no place for children. I've just never personally held that view.
Did you have anything you want to share, Camron, about your experience, or like questions or anything that you might have for Sean going forward? Or
you know what? That's funny. I'll actually ask you a question that I think brought up a lot of very interesting points of views, and I'm kind of curious about a little bit more. So one of the things that was talked about is hands outreach to the eyes, right? Like that was a big thing that we talked about. And one of the things that you kind of see stylistically occasionally is that there are some guys who typically, they're starting usually here. They're not engaged. They're back a little bit. Their hands are kind of open more so for a parry. At what point do we really go into like extended arms out? Is it kind of like up and over? Is it literally just a simple out? Because I think that was one of the things that had a couple like murmurings even throughout. But we really did hit on it. So I'm just kind of curious from your perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question. It goes back to when I was on MMA Rules and Regs, and someone, not me, but someone on that committee called that the John Jones rule, because John Jones was very much, he would kind of pitchfork out his hands. So the idea is, especially in bare knuckle, we're seeing it more and more with the rapid evolution of the sport. People want to keep their hands open. Like you said, they want to catch, they want to parry, they want to trap, and that's fine. When you're starting the action of coming forward towards the face with extended fingers, that's when the referee needs to come in. And here's a Jack Reese. Soft warning or silent warning, which is just a look. Soft warning, hey, watch your fingers. Hard warning, time. You got to close your fingers. I've been telling you. You keep doing this, it's going to cost you a point, and then eventually disqualification. There's a ramp up to all of this. So 99.9% of the time, it gets solved, and sometimes the referee's mic doesn't even catch it. Hey, make a fist, watch your fingers. But really, it's the extension of the hands, and what you don't want is someone to do this and kind of game the system in this, because we don't want a fighter, as they're trying to get their offense going, see the other fighter extending fingers towards the eyes.
See, I like the fact that you nailed it right there, specifically with it's the forward movement of it. Right, because sometimes you see guys who are maybe more in the defensive side of things, in the moment, where they're like this, where they're kind of catching, but they're not necessarily going forward with it, which I think is kind of like, maybe as a fan you look at it like, oh, but he has fingers extended or she has fingers extended. Like, well, realistically, it's going forward with them. You're right. It's that motion and going with it. Yeah.
Right, because the whole idea is we're trying to prevent eye pokes, and
exactly,
it's happily amazing to me how few eye pokes we've had in bare knuckle, specifically in BKFC. They don't happen. And I talked about it in the course, as you heard, a lot of fighters get a knuckle in the eye and they think they got poked, but out of about 1,200 fights, we've had fewer than 10 legitimate eye pokes. I showed one when Zeb Vincent was there and took the course, and we showed Zeb Vincent's last fight against Doug Coltrane. But they're very, very rare. And we certainly don't see any intentional ones. But yeah, all of the extending the fingers, same thing in MMA, you're just trying to limit eye pokes. Obviously in boxing, because of the nature of the glove, that's not an issue. You would have thumbs in the eye, and there was talk, I know how true it is, that when Sugar Ray Leonard had his detached retina in the early 80s, it was through a thumb. I don't know if that's legitimate or not. That was talked about at the time. But anytime, whether it's an MMA glove or bare knuckle with the wraps, when fingers are free, you just don't want that because it is obviously an eye poke hazard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. So kind of another question I was curious about, and it's more so something you kind of talked about at the beginning. So you're part of the original rules creation back in 2016. What was that process like, kind of iterating through year on year until you got to unified rules around 2023?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So myself and John McCarthy, and I have to give John McCarthy a lot of credit on that, and really knowing how to write technical writing for rule sets, I learned 100% from John McCarthy, and he was at the foundation of the original unified rules of MMA. Having at that time been on the MMA Rules and Regs Committee, I was familiar with technical writing. So a lot of the fouls were very easy. It's almost cut and paste, right? No headbutts, no eye gouges. And then we were clear with David Feldman, because it was for David Feldman. We were writing a rule set for BKFC at the time, not for the sport of bare knuckle, because that's who I was working for, was David Feldman. Do you want spinning back fists? No. Do you want to allow kicks? No. Do you want to allow throws like they did under the London prize ring rules in the 1800s? No. So David Feldman had a very clear idea of what he wanted. A lot of discussion then was, how much is enough? Do we do 2-minute rounds? Do we do 3-minute rounds? Do we do 5-minute rounds? What would be the maximum that we would want to fight? And really collectively, McCarthy, Feldman, and myself, we think the sweet spot is 2-minute rounds, and it's 5 rounds. Early on, and I have it on an old, probably it would be 2 laptops ago now. I just bought a new laptop, so 2 laptops ago now, but I've still got it on that hard drive. It said championship fight shall be 7 2-minute rounds. And I think after BKFC won, we all thought, yeah, it's probably not a good idea. Dr. Damuzzi, who's our chief medical officer, maybe the smartest person I've ever met in my life, if not he's in the top 3, talks about exposure. And here's an example of exposure. Boxing used to be 15 rounds. In the 80s, they moved away on championship fights from 15 to 12. Pro MMA, with UFC, obviously, in our TV, they had the unlimited rounds in the early UFC, but then it was the 10-minute rounds. Lytle fought 10-minute rounds, and then certainly in Japan, in Pancrase and Pride, they had the 10-minute rounds. It's about exposure. So are you saying MMA is less safe or more safe than boxing? No. We're just saying that we feel that 5-minute rounds is the most exposure a fighter should have. Is boxing more or less safe? No, but we're saying that you shouldn't fight more than 12 rounds. I'll go back to an NFL analogy because I love those. There's a reason why you don't see 35-game regular seasons in the NFL. There was a huge deal with the Players Union just when they added that 17th game. It's about exposure. Baseball, they play 162 games. The NFL, they play 17 games. They're both tough on the human body. It's just the matter of exposure. So early on, it was, what is the exposure we're looking at? How long are the rounds? How many rounds? Maximum number of rounds. And I'm such a fight nerd, and I love this. So I had a really good understanding going in of the Broughton's rules and of the London prize ring rules from the 1700s and the 1800s. So all of that, I was able to concoct things, but I have to give huge credit to John McCarthy and to David Feldman for really being clear on the directive.
That obviously helps. Obviously, history gives us the, best blueprints for really designing what we want the future to look like.
Yeah, no question.
And obviously going through that iterative process, especially, right? Like, having to go through those first fights and then even as you're talking about refining exposure component to it, I think is also just such a cornerstone as well. Bare knuckle fighting realistically is the 2 minutes, 5 rounds, or, BYB, 3 minutes, 5 rounds. I think is a very interesting, and also good to know component to this as well. So kind of following up then on this, now that we have the unified rules, we know about a year and a half into them kind of being in place. Maybe it's a little speculation, but what do you see as the next development that needs to be accounted for? It could be something like, I think one of the things I look at is hand fighting as the potential of like having to provide some kind of guidance for, or maybe it's something else, just out of curiosity, based on the feedback you've had going through these training sessions. Where do you think these discussions will lead going forward?
Yeah, you heard me say, Cameron, in the room, fighters are always smarter than everybody else. They always figure things out. They're always figuring things out before anybody else does. I think the evolution of the rule set is really looking at the clinch. When do we break the clinch? Because fighters will figure that out. When I talked about this early on, people just come in, they would grip up, cable up, S up, and get a break. But now it's slow. That doesn't automatically get you out. You really have to do something. You have to negate the offense. So we're seeing something on that. So I think it's a matter of what do fighters do in the clinch? And we talked about, I call these worthless punches. Yeah, that shouldn't keep you in the clinch. Is that an active clinch? Yeah. Are you really striking with intention, or are you just trying to hold position? I said it's like the bare knuckle version of heel strikes to the kidneys, right? Like, what are you really doing here? Not much. So I think, to directly answer your question, it's going to be in that clinch situation. What happens there? In terms of radical overhauls, would we allow elbows or spinning back fists or kicks? No, I don't think you're going to see anything like that. It's really just the refinement within.
See, I agree with that. And that's actually one of the things I feel like has, as the sport continues to evolve, that's one of the things you're noticing, especially with guys who are deviating from being MMA, from being boxing to being bare knuckle fighting, is their work in the clinch. But not only what they're doing, like not only the fact that they're working in it, but what they're doing in it. I think I look at Kai Stewart as a very interesting individual when it comes to this component of the game, because he's very active. And he's not always like, I wouldn't argue that he's always consistently striking, but he's always working.
Right.
That, like, he's forcing positional changes to create opportunities. And that's kind of where you're right. I think I see that next engagement of discussing the refinement of active clinch is looking at examples of what he's done. I look at the Howard Davis fight, BKFC 56 Utah. I looked at that as a clinic. Like that was some of the most interesting clinch work that I thought really highlighted like one of the key components of the sport, right? Dirty boxing. Oh my goodness. It's almost like it really is an art to watch it. But then here we are talking about the refinement of it from like, okay, I'm looking at this as a ref. When is a break really needing to be called? When is it, as a judge, that you're looking at it, and are you actually, scoring it as what it is? Is it effective in what it's doing? So thank you for kind of speaking to that.
Yeah,
as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Kai, I've called him kind of bare knuckle 2.0 because he comes out of that NAI wrestling background, he'll switch stances. He enters almost with a different philosophy than anybody else enters the clinch. Kevin Kroom, to a certain extent, but Kevin is really more of an MMA clinch, and I love Kevin Kroom. He's a Kansas City guy like myself. But Kevin basically just transposes what he did in the MMA, in his MMA career, what he did in the UFC, into bare knuckle. Whereas I think Kai is really looking at it from a different approach. What can I take from my folk style collegiate wrestling and high school wrestling, switch stances continually, and use those entries? I guess I would say somebody maybe like Kevin Kroom is punching the clinch, whereas I think Kai is clinching to punch.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very great comparison contrast of two different dirty boxing styles, and I even more so to the point, Kai is fighting as bare knuckle 2.0. I think really highlights kind of that next step, right? And we're seeing it progress, of course. And I think, obviously as progression comes about, hey, that's incumbent on us to figure out, okay, how do we need to adjust as a ruling set? How do we need to adjust judging, scoring? Yeah,
I'm always a big believer. And when I was on MMA Rules and Regs, we did a major overhaul. If you guys want to Google, some of the comments that we got from the old guard in 2015, 2016, essentially, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think Bernie Profato, who was the head of Ohio at the time, was quoted as saying by Mark Ramundi in an article. I looked at it like these are living, breathing documents. Everything should evolve. And you can have a foundation, but you need to evolve. So if you guys will indulge me, here's another NFL example. I don't know if you guys are NFL fans. Obviously, I'm a huge one. They overhauled the kickoff this year, right? Completely overhauled. In the 90s, they put in the 2-point conversion. A decade ago, they moved back where you get the extra point from. They're always looking to evolve. I'm in Kansas City, and there was a big talk last week about Patrick Mahomes was gaming the system on the roughing the quarterback, and when you cross the line of scrimmage as the quarterback, there's a good chance that's going to be addressed and changed by the competition committee in the off season. Watch a football game from the 80s. What's pass interference looks nothing like what's pass interference now. What's roughing the quarterback then, nothing now. There's always an evolutionary process. And I believe that fighting has to be the same. It doesn't matter what combat sport it is. The athletes figure this out quicker, faster, smarter, more effectively than all of us do. So to keep up with them, we have to evolve. So the unified rules of MMA were fantastic for 2001. When I got on the committee and we wrote them in 2015, they were badly outdated. A lot of people didn't want to hear that, but that's the reality. And yet, if we had kept what we came up with in 2015, in 2025, those are badly outdated. You always have to keep changing, adding to. In my opinion, they should be living, breathing documents.
I have a question.
Go for it. Yeah, I'm so sorry. No, go for it. It's your turn.
Is there any sort of instant replay? We saw a very controversial, the very first fight where Justin picked up the other fighter.
Right.
Is there any, upon first look, you're like, okay, maybe he, Gable gripped him and squeezed him. And then when you saw it from a different angle, there was nothing. But is there anything to kind of protect clearly that guy was trying to get like an injury DQ type of thing. Is there in those situations, luckily enough it came out this time, but had something controversial happen, is there any sort of instant replay, or who does that fall back on?
It's straight commission. Some commissions allow it and some don't. And then you think the challenge, I was on the Kansas Athletic Commission for 8 years, so I know this. The vast majority of our shows weren't televised, and in many cases they weren't even streamed with one or two cameras. So it's easy to have a replay if it's the UFC or Top Rank Boxing on ESPN or a boxing on DAZN, or if you would have needed it for the Netflix card in Texas Tyson Paul. Any major show, major production like we do with BKFC, where you have multiple cameras, multiple replay machines. But if it's a house show in the middle of nowhere and it's not even streamed, or maybe it's being streamed on YouTube with one camera and that camera is a guy's cell phone, that's tough to see, but it's always up to the commission. And that's something too that's frustrating to a lot of fans, a lot of fighters. I get that in a sports league, whether it's the NFL or the English Premier League, it doesn't matter. Everybody is abiding by the same set of rules. But in fighting, you're abiding by what the commission says. So if you fight in one state, then 4 months later you fight in another, then 4 months later you fight in another, you're probably fighting under 3 different rule sets. Now, the rule sets might be very, very slight, or they might be dramatically different, but there really is no uniformity. There's close to uniformity with some states, and then there's a wide variance in others. So I'll give you an example. So I'm talking to you guys from my home in Shawnee, Kansas, which is a Kansas City suburb. I live less than 15 miles from the Missouri state line. Kansas City is one city we just kind of flow across the state line without thinking about it. But when we overhauled the unified rules of MMA and we completely changed what constituted a grounded fighter, Missouri was one of the holdout states that didn't. So you imagine that you're a entry-level MMA fighter living in Kansas City. You're fighting in Kansas, a couple of months later, you're fighting in Missouri. It might not even dawn on you what state you're in, as weird as that sounds, because you're still fighting in the Kansas City metro. But I can do this in this fight, but I can't do this in that fight. That's crazy. That's always detrimental to the sport. But we don't have a federal body. I think it goes back, just if you really look at the way America is, why are speed limits different in different states? Because why are liquor laws different in different states? Because this is built on states' rights. And it's very difficult to put in a federal body, I think, when it's so woven into us as a country with states' rights. In a lot of ways, that to have one federal body, like they have with the British Boxing Board of Control in the UK, would make things easier. I just don't think the way that we're set up constitutionally, that would really even work in this country. And that goes beyond combat sports. That really goes to civics, I think, in government and history.
And I think that even this played out as well, even the way that certain commissions are able to function, right? You have Minnesota where it's a byproduct of right their state government as opposed to others where it's not as civically tied, right? It's just as much as the make of what's currently here as you're right as probably even things like stigma, right? It's maybe hard to sell to a senator, congressman, hey, we have this need for a national governing body, but then you have to address the stigma of, well, it's for fighting, it is for combat sports. And you're right. I think that does kind of really lay out kind of like the fabric that we're dealing with if we're having to think about it at that level.
Yeah, so when you get to things that seem like they would be common sense, like instant replay, some states, for whatever reason, just might say, no, we don't want instant replay. There's not even a national suspension. Now, there's a national suspension database, but when a fighter is suspended in a suspended combative sport in a state, that state only enforces that suspension. Now, there's an honor system, and states usually and other commissions will honor that suspension, but they don't have to. If somebody is suspended in Nevada and another state wants to fight them, they're going to get a lot of grief, kind of behind the scenes in the regulatory world. There's nothing that prevents them from issuing a license to that fighter. That's how Muhammad Ali got his license back. He was suspended by the New York State Athletic Commission for refusing to fight and get inducted into the United States military to fight in the Vietnam War. New York pulled his license, other states followed. It was actually a city commission then. It's now in the state of Georgia. But the Atlanta Athletic Commission said 3.5 years, enough is enough. We're giving him his license. That's a weird little footnote in history. I'm a huge Ali fan, but that just shows you that these suspensions are really a giant honor system. And if someone doesn't want to honor the suspension, they don't have to. And it was the same. There was a lot of talk about when USADA was controlling the UFC. I can tell you in Kansas, we're not being holding USADA. We'll look at we'll look more readily at California or New York or Nevada than we will with USADA. So that again shows that the system, you're really dealing with individual regulatory bodies, state to state, and it's more complex than that because many states then have tribal athletic commissions as well. There are 3 states that don't have an athletic commission completely, and that's Montana, Vermont, and Alaska to make it even more effective.
Right, and I think it all just underpins even more so how imperative the unified rules that came out in 2023 really are, right? If we can all at least agree to a certain parameter of arguments, right? If we all agree on a baseline document, right, at least we can start finding more commonality or at least finding consensus, which really, I think, again, it underpins the importance of that. I think I remember seeing a graphic come out for that, like on BKFC's like Instagram page. And I remember looking at recognizing it for the important step that it is, just as much as we look at progression into different countries, different venues, from Knucklemania 1 to Knucklemania 5, it sounds silly, but the background of really having unified rules is probably almost equally imperative and tangible to the growth and expansion than it is having successful events, right?
Yeah.
Being able to agree on.
I was in the conference room, so we were at the ABC convention in August in Las Vegas when the unified rules were passed. And the way it works basically is I was on that committee, but I don't get a vote. So every attending member of the ABC, whether they're tribal or state, they get a vote. So a tiny tribe in Oklahoma, it's a democracy. They have the same voting power as the New York State Athletic Commission. You're not weighed because you're a bigger commission or you do more fights, which is beautiful. It's the way it should be. It's total democracy. And the unified rules passed without dissent, so unanimously passed. I said to David Feldman, this is the most important thing that's happened to our company since BKFC 1. And he understood it then, and he really understands it now. Because without the unified rules, we wouldn't have California, we wouldn't have Mohegan Sun, we wouldn't have Pennsylvania, because it now made it a real sport, recognized by the ABC. And like you said, Cameron, there's a baseline that you now can go in and easily adopt, as opposed to literally starting from scratch. What do I do here?
Well, I have no other questions. So, if Cameron, if you have any other, I just wanted, I feel like this was important because I feel like Joe Blow on the Reddit's going to see this interview and be like, well, that guy who has no combat experience went and did it. And I feel like more more average people need to get involved.
Yeah.
Like I would love to see more women get involved, more youth people, younger 18-year-olds get involved. I feel like we need the youth movement and to mix it up more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think really the prerequisite should be, do you care about combat sports? And if the answer is yes, it doesn't matter if you're male, female, doesn't matter your age, where you live, your background. That's really the baseline. Do you care about combat sports? As obvious as that seems, you look back 20, 30, 40 more years ago, that wasn't always the case. So often it was literally they knew the right people and they came. And I know in the early days of MMA, you would have people judging MMA who were openly hostile towards MMA. Like, what are you doing here? So as I do more of these, and I want people to follow your example, Cameron, it's like it can be daunting going to that room and like, my God, there's Chris Lieben and Nick Barrett and Mark Colloy and Tom Taylor and Jack Reese. But so what? We all have to start somewhere. Everybody was equal. And that's what I really say. It's about inclusion. And if you care about fighting sports, that's your prerequisite, and the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. For average Joe Schmo looking at, this punchable face over here, I would incredibly recommend for sure that, if you're motivated for it, if you're curious, you have that passion, you'd go for it. Honestly, I think that you'll find that first off, you're not alone, but there are a lot of passionate people that genuinely care about this. But not only do they care about it, they care about doing it right. I think that was my other big takeaway as well, is that, for as much as we were discussing, the beautiful violence of what combat sports is, we're also equally talking about, things such as like fighter safety, integrity, separation of conflicts of interest. There are still those like pillars upon which like you really have to support any organization present, which equally blew my mind as well. Not saying that I held negative preconceptions of, the fighting world, in a professional capacity, but it definitely highlighted them even more so for sure. Which again, taking for me, again, somebody who's only ever really watched bare knuckle fighting, whose true information for all of this is fairly recent, go for it. If you have the passion for it, you have those characteristics where you want to find yourself in this world. I was telling people this, there's a lot of green pasture in this world. This is like the Wild West again. Realistically, if you are at all motivated to find where you want to plant your post, congratulations, you found your opportunity. So 100%, if ever I could say anything like in a year at all considering going to this, and I can't wait to see the Canada announcement. I'll be following that. Heck, even if it works out, maybe I cross the bridge and actually join up for another one. But no, 100%, if you're all motivated, seriously consider going for this. I definitely opened my eyes.
I really appreciate you saying that. And both of you guys, I appreciate you having me on the show. It's fun, and I'm always happy to do it anytime. Very much appreciate the time.
Well, if you do another one, we'll have to do it. I want to do another one of these, but I want to get some of the professional fighters. Jessica Borga wanted to do it, and I said, look, I got to give somebody else a chance to talk. So she wants to do another one.
We'll do one with Borga. I'm going to see her next week. So, yeah, we'll definitely. Yeah, absolutely. But no, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. To both of you, genuinely. Thank you very much.
Have a great
thank you for your time as well. Yeah, have a great Knucklemania.
Thank you. I'll speak to you guys soon. All the best. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.